Welcome, everyone. This is the first in a series of three sessions, rather, of LinkedIn Live interviews and discussions, where we're going to dive deeper into the XR for Human project, and specifically the European XR Code of Conduct, which is one of the main deliverables of this particular Horizon Europe project. So, as I said, this is the first one in the three. It's really going to introduce what is the Code of Conduct and illuminate some of the discussions and the decisions that have already been experienced, getting us to this point now where there is a public draft available for consultation, expert consultation. So I'm joined today by Lene Hagen and Shereen Cox, who are from the University of Southeastern Norway and University of Oslo, respectively. They are researchers who are working in the XR for Human project, and in a little bit, they're going to uh, make a presentation is setting the scene of what the code of conduct is right now and how it got there. And then collectively, we're going to discuss elements of it, dive a little deeper. We'll take your questions. So feel free to certainly share your comments below, and we'll see them here in live form, and we'll respond to them as we can. We'll also respond to some of the comments and feedback that we've already received in the XR for Human forum, which is it's a persistent online repository, another one of the deliverables of the XR for Human project. So let me introduce myself briefly before I turn it over to Shireen and Lene. I am Michael Barngrover. I am the managing director of XR for Europe, and XR for Europe is one of the partners within the XR for Human project, which is a 3-year EU-funded Horizon Europe program that is looking at ethical, human-centered interoperability issues and topics related to virtual worlds and XR in Europe, and drafting living organic documents and guidelines that are going to hopefully help to raise the floor of what is acceptable design and development of XR, not just for Europe, but for the world, but done through a European prism. So on that note, I'd like to turn it over to Lene and Shireen to introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Michael. My name is Lene Hagen. I'm an associate professor at the University of Southeastern Norway. My interest in XR technologies comes from the potential of XR technologies to be used in various sectors. As these technologies become more integrated into our daily lives, it's crucial to establish guidelines that prioritize humans' well-being, as well as human-centered values and privacy and inclusivity and fairness. So I'm particularly concerned about the next generations who may use these technologies more than we do, both in education and work life. So I want to ensure they encounter a safe and a safe XR technology environment. So my background is from vision science, and working in this field makes me aware of how common vision problems also may affect the use of XR technologies. So because many people have uncorrected common vision problems and might not even know it, a significant portion of the population could be disadvantaged or even excluded from using XR if these issues aren't considered in the design. So that's one reason why it's important for developers to think about inclusivity and accessibility, for example, when creating XR experiences.
Hey, I'm Shereen Cox. I am a postdoc researcher at the Center for Medical Ethics, University of Oslo. And I have to say ditto to most of what Lene just shared in terms of the interest in XR technologies and how rapidly this technology is developing and how it will impact lives. My background is in pharmacy and ethics, particularly regulatory ethics. So I'm looking forward to really getting into the discussion with you today. The University of Oslo, we led the work package on ethics, looking at what existing frameworks are there, where the gaps were in terms of ethical development of XR, and we have been putting some publications out to really try to sensitize persons to some of the main ethical challenges. So looking forward to this discussion.
Excellent. Thank you both. I think now you have a presentation I'll go ahead and bring up on the screen.
Yeah, so we suggest just starting with a short presentation of the Code of Conduct, the draft version of the Code of Conduct, and something about the development process. So this initial draft of the Code of Conduct was created collaboratively by the XR4HUMAN project group, which includes members with various backgrounds. The draft was developed with existing ethical and legal frameworks in mind, prioritizing human-centered values. And now this first draft is open for public consultations. So stakeholders are invited to provide feedback directly within the document, and also contributions and discussions are welcome through the XR4HUMAN forum. So this phase of stakeholder feedback is crucial for refining the Code of Conduct, ensuring it's clear, relevant, comprehensive, and addresses the ethical challenges in the rapidly evolving XR ecosystem. So the draft Code of Conduct outlines the ethical responsibilities for developers working on immersive technologies like VR, AR, MR. And the aim is to ensure that these technologies respect human rights, protect user privacy, promote inclusivity, and support the well-being of all users. So this draft applies to all developers, organizations, and stakeholders involved in the creating and using immersive technologies. And it provides guidelines for making these technologies ethical, inclusive, safe, and aligned with human rights. So when discussing the foundation of the XR4HUMAN Code of Conduct, we can see that it operates on several levels. So first, some high-level values are proposed, and these are the core ethical beliefs, the fundamental reasons behind creating the code. So values such as respecting people's rights, ensuring wellness, and promoting inclusivity. And next, these guiding principles are outlined. And these are more action-oriented and translate high-level values into behaviors. For instance, the value of respecting people's rights leads to principles like ensuring user privacy and inform users about data governance. So these principles provide specific direction on how to uphold the values. And finally, there are proposed concrete articles, and these are the most specific levels, offering clear and hopefully practical instructions for developers and designers. So, for example, if a guiding principle is ensuring user privacy, a concrete article might specify actions like clearly explaining data collection practices in plain language. And these articles are the how-to of ethical XR development, so directly putting the principles and values into practice. And this first draft is open for public consultations, and we welcome all kind of feedback. So you're invited to provide comments directly within the document, or also join the conversation at the forum.
All right, excellent. I mean, I do hope that many of our listeners, those who are live and those who are going to watch it later, take the time to go look at the current draft of the document and spend a bit of time just reading it fully and then sharing some of the comments there. But certainly now I think we're going to be able to have a conversation that those who are watching live can definitely react to and contribute some thoughts and feedback to. So maybe just my first question to you both. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what gaps maybe were already in the XR ecosystem that this particular code of conduct is going to hopefully maybe try and address? I think you mentioned, Shereen, that you took a look at the regulatory landscape or the existing frameworks that were there, and I mean, were there gaps that you guys felt?
Well, in the beginning, when we started to look to see what this is particularly in the ethics work package, but before I go there, I just probably start with the project itself, because the project was divided into several work packages where we looked at interoperability issues, regulatory issues as it relates to ethical or inclusive development of XR technologies. And then we looked at ethics. In the ethics work package, we looked to see what is out there, where are there guidelines, and there was quite a few, I would say, that were proposed, but this mainly came from persons in academia. So they were writing about what they saw as or anticipate as issues in with the rapid development of XR technologies. And yes, what was lacking was a comprehensive code or something that developers across Europe, across the world could say this is something that we could use as a guide in our development. So there were so many different ones that were being proposed, but you would have to like dig for that. So something that was coming from like the EU as an overarching guide is that was missing. And so that was where the project was able to find the individual gaps in terms of regulatory aspect, interoperability aspect, and pull it all together. Looked at, as Lenny mentioned, try to identify what were the main values across the board. So there was some stakeholder consultation. So we didn't just come up with things. There were stakeholder consultations, there were surveys, we had workshops, and we also did extensive literature review. So with all that we did, we were able to get a lay of the land, pull together some of these challenges or issues that were identified, as well as what was proposed, and then we were able to co-create with the different stakeholders what we now have as a code of conduct. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say just to contribute as well, I think my impression was that there were a lot of maybe, I don't know if manifesto is the right word, but definitely a lot of documents that establish at a very high level certain, what I think are in the code of conduct represented as principles. But oftentimes they were so high level that it was a very, I mean, it was a very open question, maybe how you would act on that. So
Yeah.
I think, talking in the next question, how you mentioned having the stakeholder consultations already in some interviews. Can you talk a little bit more about the process of trying to bring what may be already more established at the higher level, but bring it down into something in the code of conduct, the articles, something that can be guiding decision making at the level of a developer or designer? Can you just illuminate a little bit more these interviews and other methods and processes that you've taken?
Uh, do you want to go, Lenny?
That's okay.
No? I think our approach was more a practical one, in that we, after doing the empirical work, we actually sat down and tried to understand what it is developers want. And I think your role in terms of XR for Europe and other groups like open I'm trying to remember the but there were a number of persons who kept saying do not do what has been happening over and over again, which, as you said, so technical, so out of the box that we can't even see how to apply it. And so that was where the co-creation played a great role, where we asked persons, what do you think is a practical approach to this? And so in terms of the principles, that's still what is, kind of at a higher level, but then the articles help to ground it, where we spoke in very practical ways how you're going to implement these principles. And then we move from the articles in terms of giving a more concrete description to, we are now in the process of having a rating repository, as well as we have on our web page an experience library. So you can actually test your ideas. You can actually ask questions. You can put an idea out there. You have the XR for Europe, Human Forum, So there are so many ways that this project has really tried to engage with developers to let them understand what these principles mean in a real way, not in a very abstract way. And now we're also putting forward in our rating repository an ethical impact assessment, which will also help them to ask specific questions for every single principle or area of impact. So if it is about the technology, if it is about the data protection, there are specific questions that will allow the developer to think about it, to really say, okay, I'm looking at privacy. It's not just to have some encryption there, but when I have a device that is recording a bystander, maybe I'm just thinking about the individual who is using, but now I'm thinking about the bystander that is being recorded. And these questions cause them to think about the very practical things. Protecting children, protecting vulnerable persons. Perhaps you think I'm creating a game, for example, and it's supposed to be exciting, and you're just so focused on the idea that you don't consider the possibility of harm. So we have practical suggestions such as timeout. Does your system allow somebody to take a break? How do you know when, how can you assist this person in really mitigating some of the possible harms? Bringing these forward with questions, not necessarily dictating to the developers. So to summarize, we have an approach of you learn. So you learn from all that we have done in terms of the empirical work. You assess. You can do the ethical impact assessment or use our checklist, which is like a one-page quick way of just asking yourself, have you considered these things? And then you test. You can try the experience library, and then you can reflect and say, how can I improve on it? So we're trying as much as possible to make it very practical.
And maybe, the next question, and this again for you both, making it very practical, I think also opens up reality that there's a lot of different perspectives. A lot of, I mean, not just in terms of maybe the role of the application, because that's a big one, whether it's an application that's made for an enterprise use case, which, it's very specific. And so accessibility is a topic that maybe just is viewed differently. It has a different context there than in a consumer application. But one of the questions that has come up that I know I've heard is about cultural differences, and so how to maybe design this document to be something that can guide, but engage with, I guess, differences that maybe have cultural bounds to it. So how do you guys approach or consider the role of these cultural differences in how people will engage with the code of conduct?
Okay, one approach taken is to focus on establishing foundational ethical values that are considered to have broad relevance, such as respect for persons or well-being or inclusivity. So while the specific applications of the code's principles may vary across cultures, the underlying commitment may be is to ethical and inclusive practices that may be more universal across cultures.
Yeah, so it's like the principles are meant to be cross-cultural, but in the articles, this is where it gets into the individual practitioner reflecting their cultural perspectives in the way that they engage with the articles themselves.
Yes, and we do, for example, if you're creating an avatar, that it is you should have all the elements that would allow that person to really replicate that individual, how they look, etc. As well as if you're creating an environment that you can allow the user feedback. If you're going to be creating an environment that represents, I mean, Norway, for example, and you want to represent Norwegian culture, then get feedback from Norwegians, not necessarily that you just think of something and then try to create it. So within the articles, we emphasize getting user feedback. Who is your intended user? And what is it that they think about what you're doing. So it's really a lot, it's user-centered by design in terms of not just conceptualizing something and then deploying it, but that you start at the beginning to get feedback and include the user.
Uh, so I guess taking it into practice, one in the forum, there was a one of the comments about the forum was looking at its applicability. So going back and looking at these articles, and from the perspective of small XR startups, the question was, there's this pressure to deliver quickly or deliver cheaply, to be very efficient. Even the designer and the developer in this scenario may not be the most empowered to determine schedule and other things about production. But so knowing that there are these constraints, how would you ideally see the code of conduct being utilized by designers and developers? Could you elaborate a little bit more, knowing that again, it's in a perfect world, they look at it from the beginning and they're kind of referencing it throughout it. But maybe in practice, how would you envision ideally it being utilized by them?
Well, so yes, so I understand the concern about the applicability of the code of conduct for small startups under pressure. At the same time, we aim to make it practical and adaptable, even in a fast-paced environment. So, trying to provide clear guidelines, perhaps that can help startups with ethical decisions without slowing down the development process. And also that emphasizing these ethical values are also crucial for building trust with the customers. So perhaps understanding the importance of following these ethical guidelines may be important. Perhaps startups can adopt these principles gradually, focus on the most critical ones first, such as privacy, inclusivity, and perhaps also that they can think of following the code of conduct as a way to differentiate themselves in the market and build this long-term trust with the users. So of course, all kind of feedback from the developers, for example, themselves, will be very useful for us also. What will be helpful for them?
It's interesting you mentioned, that having a potential advantage in the market, for differentiation, which I guess would mean that somehow the owners of this intellectual property or this product would be able to communicate that they had, followed this code. So that it introduces an interesting new element, because that's separate from the code. That's actually like saying, how do people communicate the code to people who won't engage with the code directly? They're the ultimate maybe beneficiaries of it. That's interesting. I'm thinking just in practice, how I might envision it to be utilized. I would imagine it be printed, very old-fashioned, printed and put into the meeting rooms or the conference rooms, the workshops rooms, where people are coming together from different, divisions within a team and saying, how are we going to design and then execute the next stage of production. When someone starts to get into a disagreement, just coincidentally, oh, I look behind me, there's an article that kind of addresses this particular conflict that we're having internally. I mean, so that comes to my mind, but of course that assumes like physical co-working, and I think we're in an environment now where increasingly there's a lot of remote co-working, where it makes it more challenging to put these types of resources just available when you need it, but at the same time not requiring you to go take a concrete, discrete action to go get it. It's just a resource that's omnipresent.
But if I could ask you, Michael, what about the funders of these startups? Could they be part of the strategy to get them to buy in and to say, if we're going to fund your work, then perhaps you will need to show us that you have aligned in this way. Because that is one way in other areas, other types of research, that the sponsors actually influence a lot of how the persons who are doing research behave. So
I mean,
that could be
yeah.
one approach.
I mean, that's a great question because it actually connects to something I was intending to ask you. Like looking at how code of conducts are adopted or implemented in other contexts, more mature industries. And I'm thinking of like maybe a medical startup. You know, the business risk to not following established either regulatory requirements or acknowledged best practice, that if you don't follow it, you're really introducing risk of penalty or loss of licensing or certifications. You know, then an investor says, well, this is a requirement. You know, if you don't do this, you are simply not investable. And I think in the XR space right now, we it's probably not mature enough that that those types of material risks to the business for non-compliance, for non-ethical design, are just not, they're not mature enough that an investor can say, you start to quantify what that risk is for their investment and thus incorporating it into their investment decision-making process. I mean, for sure, investors do consider ethics, but they probably have to consider it, at least within XR, I would imagine, without much quantifiability. And thus it probably varies very, very greatly by how they perceive the use case or how they understand, you know, the use case and the regulatory landscape that they might be in.
But what about the risk of reputational damage? Because I'm thinking simple thing as, I mean, thinking AR Pokemon Go, when people
Mhm.
start to meet in accidents because of distraction and addiction, then there is that, they had to make some changes to say, okay, these are some warnings and, we can't take responsibility for X, Y. So there is also that part where startups who are persons who are going into this direction of quickly, rapidly developing something could have to stop and think about the long-term harm that could happen to that company. So yes, you get the money now, but later on, if you did not consider certain foreseeable risk, then the reputational damage could prevent you from getting additional funds. And so starting at the beginning where you focus on ethical values and you say, okay, I'm going to try to ensure that it's not just about meeting strict regulatory requirements, but also to be able to present that we considered XYZ and we put
Mhm.
ethics at the front, then the long term, both reputation and product will perhaps create better trust and better relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that for the company, for the company themselves, not the investor, but for the
Yeah.
company, there's only benefit from taking the time to consider the ethical consequences or, you know, issues that go into it. There's only a benefit. And then if it gets cut because the benefit is just not perceived to be great enough, you know, under the conditions of the work. But no one really says, or plausibly no one can say that there's no benefit. Because as you said, you know, ultimately it's, you know, it's something you can communicate to build greater trust or engagement with your audience. So that's always a benefit. From an investor perspective, I think this is actually again where it maybe gets a little more challenging because think of self-driving vehicles that have accidents. No one thinks about the investor. You know, think about Theranos. No one's penalizing the investor. The investors are penalized because they lost maybe some of that
Yeah,
investment. But
that's
the
true.
consumer data is a detachment, you know, from in that role, and that's one of the things they're paying for is, you know, we get to get the benefits if you succeed, but we don't have to take all the risk. You know, there are other investors and there's some separation.
Yeah.
But for the companies, there's only benefit. And so I think, yeah, it's up to a good, successful code of conduct is easy to access, easy to consider, and its impact on your decision making is, you know, consistent and observable. Like you can recognize that it's impacted my decision making.
Yeah.
You know? It just because of the time we're getting close to the time now for engaging with some of the other comments and feedback that we've received so far. So we have some from the forum, but because we've had a couple here in LinkedIn, I'd like to draw attention to a couple questions in the LinkedIn, and these are coming from Federico. So Federico has taken the time to look at the code of conduct and references a few specific articles. So for those who are watching live, you maybe aren't going to be able to see exactly which article he's referring to, but I'll just read it here. So he's talking about Article 5.4, and I gave put it here. So implementing safeguards to discourage the creation of avatars that may be harmful, offensive, or cause distress. And so then he follows it up with, I guess, knowing that this is complicated, very complicated to try to define for multiple people what is harmful or distressing or offensive. I guess the question is just how do you balance it with another point, Article 4.1, which is about inclusivity? So I guess no right answer. It's a difficult question, but I guess maybe how do you, when you're balancing the code of conduct and drafting it, how do you try to balance inclusivity and allowing people to be themselves if they want, and then at the same time having another article that takes a different perspective a bit on it?
I think we also address it somewhat in in 5.4, where we spoke about community rules and moderation tools. So if there is a community that you can assume a certain image as an avatar, and to you, I look good, and to somebody else, it looks offensive, then that community, like in real life, would need to dictate what is acceptable. So I think in some societies, if I decide to take off my clothes and walk nude, it might be offensive to a lot of persons. But if I do it on the beach, it's okay, because it's that beach, if it's a nude beach, allows it. Just being a bit extreme there, but just saying each community might need to make its rules about what is acceptable or not, and how to moderate when someone may do something that is quote unquote breaking the rules. From a code of conduct now, it's really difficult. It would be important to say it's good to consider, but to say how for every single, it's not possible. So each person, each developer who is creating an environment, whether it's a virtual environment, a game, whatever it is, that may have a community of individuals, then you would probably need to determine or dictate or organize some sort of policies and agree on what is appropriate or inappropriate within that context. It has to be contextual. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Lene, you want to
Yeah,
add?
yeah, so I agree with you on that. It has to be related to the context and related to the intended use. So it will be different for an application that is meant for children and adolescents, perhaps, than for grown-ups. But I agree that this is challenging. It is. It's not very, yeah.
I mean, aside, in addition to contextual, I would say for me, the way I interpret, I mean, and this is my approach, my perspective on these topics, is that it also needs to be socially engaged. This is not for the designer or the developer in an ideal scenario. It is not for them to determine when they make it. It's them to provide opportunities for those who engage with this, who are there in the experience, to contribute to it. Maybe 6 months, 6 years, maybe 6 decades. Who knows how long these platforms will be around, to engage with making decisions, with a decision
Yeah.
in a specific moment. So I think that's also quite challenging. Not, I would say, not so challenging to write. It's challenging to make that
Enforce.
satisfying for people, because a lot of people have different expectations. They're wanting this to be safe for me, but safe for everyone according to what is safe for me.
Yeah.
And what we're, in some cases, I mean, my perspective, and I think the code of conduct tries to again empower the decision maker at that moment to include future decision makers into a collective decision making process that is going to vary case by case.
Yeah.
So yeah, so thank you very much, Federico. Very good question.
Yes.
So
Very
again,
good.
anyone who's anyone who's listening live, you can certainly So I'll have time to post a couple more questions. We'll go to one less in the forum, and then see how we do with time. But so we talked about the practical. So we've kind of addressed some of the questions that we had picked here. But there's one important one, very concrete, which was about a proposal coming from a contributor whose name is Pepe, uh, about integrating the EU child guarantee and these and 20 principles of the European Pillar of Social Rights into the Code of Conduct. So this is something very concrete suggestion about bringing something already established and maybe canonized in order to align, in I guess in a regulatory or conceptual sense, all these different efforts. And I think how do you consider, as you mentioned, you did the landscaping of frameworks and other systems. How much did you feel the need that this needs to fit into, I guess, maybe other developments and trends, or it's standing on its own and it's aware and engages with these other initiatives and such?
To be honest, I think I did not look at that one, to be honest. And I don't think in our work package others have really looked at it. So I think it would be important to see what it says, to see how whether or not it aligns with what all the others that we have looked at. Because I think we did identify a number of principles that were shared in all the other codes or ethical frameworks that were proposed from academia, and um, this code of conduct that we have actually developed reflects all of that. So I would be very surprised. And we also looked at the virtual worlds panel that EU
Mm.
had. And so I would be very surprised if we have not somewhat aligned already. But I think it's worth looking into it, looking into that document to see, did we miss something? Could we reference it as well? So I'm really happy for that proposal, and I think our work package definitely will look into it and see how it, whether or not our code of conduct aligns, or if there is if there's something that we missed and what we can actually consider from it. So tell him
Mhm.
thanks on our behalf.
Yep. I mean, for me, when I looked at it, I think one of there were two questions. When one question was how specific to be about children, like to really identify children consistently and clearly as a special category. Because I think as it is currently, they are included, but they're included more broadly in, user groups or, communities that are maybe at risk, at exceptional risk or particular risk. But I think one suggestion that I read in it was to really, really focus on children. So I wonder what you thought about that. And then there's a second broader question that maybe I can come to if we have time after that, from that.
I think Lenny has done a lot of work with children at XR. Uh, but I just say this and ask Lenny to go ahead. From the literature review, there has been a lot of focus on children because one of the main concerns is the unintended long-term effects. It is not known. What will be the long-term effects of children spending so much time using, they have these device, if you're in using, talking about VR, the HMDs, all of these devices, and if it's for gaming, how much time they spend in it, the impact on memory. I think that was one of the things that stood out to me, because you may develop false memories, and so there's the long-term impact is like an unknown realm that persons, philosophers, everyone is really trying to figure out what will be the long-term effect on children. So I am a bit biased in that I agree that we need to perhaps look at children, but is it for the code of conduct to focus mainly on children? I am not sure, and it would be nice to hear from others what they think. Lenny?
Yes, thanks. So I absolutely agree that protecting children also in using these technologies is very, very important. So whether to integrate this into the code of conduct or not, I think it's very important to look into it. I think it's about balancing specificity and comprehensiveness. So if the code becomes too broad, it might be challenging to implement and enforce effectively. On the other hand, aligning with these established frameworks can also provide these clear guidelines and enhance the credibility of the code. So it's important to consider whether this integration might make the code of conduct too broad or too complex, I think. But I'm very happy for the suggestion, and I think that we should absolutely go into it and look through and consider what we can include or not, and what is perhaps already included.
All right, and one final question, then we'll close. But kind of coming from this and another suggestion in the forum about aligning with the high level, I forget the term now. I should have had it written down, but the high level
Alt AI?
governance of AI, yeah, that which H-leg or something. And so one of the suggestions was for adoptability, and I think adoptability more maybe at a political or regulatory implementation level, but trying to put XR as a code of conduct and ethical guidelines within the AI Act, the AI guidelines, not the AI Act specifically, but within guidelines for AI, because it's more advanced. But I think an alternative in this example was trying to maybe put XR within child safety frameworks. And so I guess for me, the question when reading it was how to balance I guess the how much easier or how much clearer it would be for this to be adopted by fitting it into something that's already in the process of adoption versus trying to establish this is a distinct framework for virtual worlds and XR specific to design and development. So I just throw it out there for you to ask how would you consider the idea of making it fit within one of the other frameworks or being something distinct?
I know that you have some opinion about this, Shereen.
Well, AI is AI, and I agree. There is a lot of attention on AI, and with the AI EU AI Act and Alt AI in terms of the principles for that. A lot of persons have already started to embrace that, and I agree that that is worth considering. However, XR is unique in that there's just a lot more to XR than AI. AI is one aspect of XR in term and used a lot for like content creation, etc. And there is a concern about AI and manipulation, which I think the AI Act already somewhat addressed. So I think it we ought not to replace or integrate XR with AI, but certainly incorporate what is happening in terms of the AI Act into what we are discussing about XR, because the
Mhm.
truth is AI is one part of XR. And we're talking about, I mean, this is a whole nother discussion. We're talking about the physical risk. We're talking about the psychological risk. We're talking about so many aspects to the different elements of XR technology that AI ethics would not address. And as someone who teaches ethics and in fact also teach AI ethics, it's really, there are just so many different things to consider. Human centered design, for example. When we're talking about XR, we're talking about even the HMD and Lene helped me here in terms of the vision aspect and how that impacts on your vision. No, there's not a lot of data to say it's going to make you go blind. Certainly, that's not what we're trying to say. But certainly, there is also increasing data that there is some possible physical harm that is just from the devices themselves. Also, what XR technologies capture, all of these output devices that can capture your eye movement. I'm here talking to you right now, and there's just so much that it is pulling from in terms of data, constant data capture. Um, that is unique. And so, what I'm trying to say is, I don't think we should fall in the AI trap and then get lost in it. I think it is important to be distinct and to stand firm on that, but that is my opinion. I can't say that is the XR for human opinion, but I think we could easily get lost and everybody starts to, those who are not as well informed, certainly the audience here might be well informed, but those who are not well informed start to assume that XR is AI if we do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say XR for Europe. I can speak for XR for Europe. We agree with you that they are distinct enough that they are definitely deserving of dedicated attention both. I said that was the last question, but I have to apologize. We have one last question from the audience, and I think it may be a quick one. I'll put it up here. It's from Jan. So Jan says, "Who within the context of the code of conduct would you identify as a vulnerable group besides children?" This is following up on the discussion about how much to be specific about sexual choices.
So actually, in the draft of the code of conduct, we have a footnote that is defining what we mean with vulnerable groups, including the following: minors and unaccompanied minors, disabled people, elderly people, pregnant women, single parents with minor children, victims of trafficking in human beings, persons with serious illnesses, persons with mental disorders, etc., etc. So it's given in the footnote on page 5 in the draft document, and it's taken from an EU directive. So
Yeah.
please.
But just to add there too, for the vulnerable groups, if we were to be a little bit more specific, it would be definitely, other than children, be those persons who more and more XR technologies are being used with, like persons in the field of psychology, for example. It's used a lot, virtual reality, to help persons overcome phobias, also help with persons who have had some sort of trauma. And harm there is something that you have to be very careful in how you discuss it and navigate it, because re-traumatization is something that persons have expressed that has happened with VR experiences, having encountered violent experiences as well. So it could be that individuals who have had some form of trauma and are then being subject to some sort of psychological treatment or experiment, then those to me stand out as another vulnerable group, and that they, especially if you're doing experiments or you're a therapist, you would need to really be consciously aware of them. I thought of the elderly, but then we are on XR to some extent. The studies that I came across is not as much as those in terms of the psychology group. A lot of research is happening with VR and yeah, in terms other than children. So I'm a little bit concerned about that group, because if there is not much ethics oversight, which tends to happen, you have ethics approval but not oversight. What happens to those persons who are re-traumatized when they have an experience, and this is mainly in a research, and then they are left there? Who is there to give them support if it's a soldier, etc.? So that set of persons are I have a concern about in terms of psychology research.
Yeah, that's the first time I've heard that answer, but it is a significant group to date. Right? There's been a lot of research on it, but it reminds me as well of the apps that have trying to transition for reasons of getting approvals, not getting approvals for therapies, transitioning into mindfulness or wellness, mental wellness, and still trying to convey a value proposition and a benefit without necessarily committing to it, because they can't maybe legally commit to it, but still trying to provide a psychological benefit to users. But to your point, exactly, these are people then who are designers and developers are trying to have a positive mental effect, but are they going through all the steps necessarily to really consider consequences of their design choices and development choices and the long-term accessibility to the platform products and such?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think if Rose was here, she might be disappointed if I don't say women, especially in virtual environments. You know, we have the metaverse is getting more and more popular in terms of, yeah. So women have, there are some reports that come out that persons in certain virtual environments feel like they're harassed, and that persons may think because this is a virtual harassment, it's okay, it's not physical harassment. And so that is, that is also a consideration in terms of vulnerability. Being a female who wants to be in the XR space, who wants to just be there and enjoy just like anyone else, but your avatar is being harassed, and how does that, yeah, impact on you psychologically?
Mhm. All right. Well, I think we're at time, and I want to thank you both for staying a little late, actually, to address these questions and to give them some proper attention in the discussion. So this is, as I said at the beginning, this is the first of a series of three LinkedIn Live sessions. So we're going to have two more. They'll also be here in LinkedIn Live, and will be dual streamed to our YouTube channel. But the discussion is ongoing in the XR for Human forum. So check in the comments to this particular session, and in the other sessions, you'll see links to the forum. You'll see links as well to the document itself, the current version of the draft document, where you can access and share your comments directly. They're being collected and reviewed continuously. So with that, I would like to close the session. Thank you very much again, Shereen and Lene. And thank you everyone who watched us live and contributed your questions. And we'll see you next time.